Your project this week is to build a chatbot starting from the code in either the project that I developed and demoed in the videos or from the code in the GitHub repository. It's probably easier to start with the code in the GitHub repository because there's a fairly clean interface to the chat server functionality. So what do I mean by a chatbot? Well, a chatbot is basically a piece of code that joins the chat just like a real user and monitors the chat for different events and can respond to selected events. Doesn't have much of a user interface, but I put together an example of a chatbot that meets the requirements for the lab this week. And I'm going to go ahead and start it to demo it. So I'm already running the chat server that I developed in the GitHub repository. And then this new chat bot, I'm going to node client.js. And the chat bot starts up and joins the server, posts welcome chatbot and currently in chatbot. So the first user joins the chat, and this will be Alice. And when Alice joins the chat, chatbot says, welcome, Alice. And then chatbot says, currently in chat, chatbot and Alice. And then when the next person joins, who will be Bob, chatbot says, welcome, Bob, currently in chat, chat Bob, Alice, and Bob. Of course, Alice will see this as well. And then one more person will go ahead and join up with Carol. So welcome, Carol. Now in the chat is chatbot Alice, Bob, and Carol. So if at some point, I think this is Bob, if Bob decides to leave, the chatbot keeps track of that. Doesn't say anything just yet, but if I go ahead and execute the command chatbot space roll call, we see that currently in chat is chatbot Alice and Carol. So Bob is gone because he exited. And if I do the same thing with, I think this is Carol. So Carol is going to exit. That's actually Alice. So if I execute the roll call command, I see that just chatbot and Carol are in here. So it's tracking as people join. And this will be David. So now currently in chat is chatbot Carol and David. So chatbot responds to join events and leave events by keeping track of who's in the chat. It also reacts to people joining the chat by welcoming them and showing the roll call. And there are a couple of other commands that I put together. So chatbot will tell you what time it is, which is maybe not all that impressive given that there's a timestamp right in the message that says that chatbot is giving this post. But it responds. And anything else that you give it, for example, chatbot help, it says, sorry, I don't understand help, try time or roll call. So that's basically it for the chatbot functionality. This doesn't do anything special. If I control C it to exit, it just goes away. But let's look at the code for a second. So I'm going to start with chat server, which is exactly the same as the code in the GitHub repository. So no changes here. And then chat connector, the only change that I made was instead of requiring chat UI, I'm requiring chat bot now and making a chat bot class. And then instead of making a chat UI, I'm making a chat bot. And I renamed UI to bot everywhere. And then everything else here is the same. So a chat bot is exactly like a chat client, except instead of the UI, there's a chunk of code which you are going to write this week that implements the chat bot functionality. So just like the UI displays chat commands, the bot reacts to those events and will post messages based on them. Now, there's one thing that's a little tricky here that's kind of a gotcha, and so I wanted to give you a hint along the way. So in order to demonstrate this, I'm not going to show you the chatbot code because that would be making it too easy for you. So I'm going to make a new chatbot 2, and I'm going to start to stub out just a little bit until I get to the point where I want to give you the hint. So here's a new file called chatbot2.js, and I'm not going to add it to Git. And let's go ahead and const event emitter equals require events. And I think that's all I need for now. And then we'll do module.exports equals class chatbot extends event emitter. And there's a constructor that takes a connector. And then the first thing I'm going to do is call the super method, the constructor of event emitter. And then so in the original chat UI, which I don't have here anymore, and so the chat bot is going to want to react to some events that the chat connector emits. And I'm going to let you figure that part out. But the first thing the chat UI does when it starts up is it asks the user for their name. And then once the user types in their name, that's when it emits a name event and passes in the user's name. So it's actually this event listener in chat connector that's listening for the bot to give a name event, which is causing it to make the connection to the backend server and to start listening to the socket for messages to arrive. So the natural thing to do in this chat bot here is in the constructor to go ahead and say this.emit name chatbot. So this would be how the chatbot would emit that that it's got a name, and the chat connector rather is looking for that event and should react to it. Except this doesn't actually work. So I'm going to put a breakpoint here, and I'm going to run it under the debugger. And actually, I had some breakpoints from before, so let me get rid of those breakpoints. So I'm going to continue, and nothing. So basically processed finished with exit code 0. And if I do that over here as well, so let me go ahead and run the chat client, nothing. It just exits. So there's really two things that are going on here that's causing it to exit. The first thing is any process will exit when the event loop is empty. So when there are no events pending, and it's not explicitly waiting for a timer to go off or something like that, it will exit. And in the normal chat client, the reason it's not doing that is because this code gets executed, which causes the connection to the chat server. And so it's going to sit there and listen for events on the socket, and that prevents it from closing because it's occupied. But here, since we're never actually getting to this code, there are no other events that cause this thing to stay active, and it basically just goes away. So that's the first issue. But the real issue is why it isn't calling this bit of code. And the reason is when I create a new chatbot, the first thing it does after calling the constructor for event emitter is to emit that thing. And so basically that happens right away. As soon as this line gets executed, that's when the thing gets emitted. And it's not until here where I start listening. So what happens is when this line gets executed, that emit happens synchronously before the listener is attached to the bot. And so that's what I want to fix. And there's a couple of ways to fix it. One way of fixing it is to split the thing that makes the bot object here. So this doesn't do the emit anymore. Then I go ahead and I do the add. And then here at the bottom of the constructor, I have a call to a method on the bot that actually does the emit. So down here somewhere, I'd say like bot.run. And then it would be the bot.run thing that actually causes the emit to happen. So that will work. Let me go ahead and demonstrate it. So what I'm talking about is instead of having the emit here, the constructor doesn't really do anything except it's going to store the connector. So this dot connector equals connector. And then there's going to be a run method, which doesn't take any arguments. And that's going to call this dot emit, name in chatbot. Actually, I didn't need the connector just yet. So let me go ahead and try that. And sure enough, it's sitting there. And if I look at the server, I see that it logged a message that chatbot joined. So that's the first way to fix it. And I don't actually like fixing it that way, because that involves changing this chat connector code. Even though it's a trivial change, adding this bot.run at the bottom, it offends my sense of purity here. I want to make it work without changing this code at all. And the way I can do that is basically, instead of doing the running this dot emit right away, I can actually defer executing this line of code until after it's continued and executed all of this code in the construct method and gotten all the way to the bottom and basically returned from the constructor. So after it's returned from the constructor, what it's going to do is it's going to execute the event loop, or it's going to start pulling events off of the event loop and executing them. And so what I want to do is, instead of doing the emit here synchronously, I want to push this line onto the event queue, and then it will get executed next time it's ready to process events. And there's a built-in function or built-in method for doing that called process.nextTick. So here, all I have to do is say process.nextTick, and then this is going to take a function. And I could write it as, function open, close, curly bracket, and so on. Or I can use big arrow notation, which is what I'm going to do. And then here, since I only have one command, I can just go ahead and put that in here. I don't need curly brackets. There. So this says execute this function as soon as you start pulling the next event off the event loop, which will be after the constructor is completed. So let's go ahead and try that, and it should do the same thing. Oops. It's not next tick. What is it? Lower camel case. Don't know why I capitalized that. Okay, so let me try it now. Okay, and it's sitting there waiting, which means that the emit actually got ran after those listeners were set up. And so I got my connection to the server, and the chatbot is there. So that should be everything you need to know. When you get a join event, you want to add whoever's joining to a list of people who are in the room. When you get a leave event, you want to remove that person from the list. I'll let you figure out how to do that. And then when you get a post message, check if it's at chatbot. And if it's at chatbot, respond to the events appropriately. So time, roll call. And then if you want to do anything else that's creative or interesting, feel free to implement that as well.